The opera ends and everyone spills out into the cold February night, surrounded by the dreary grays that provided the only color of the East Berlin of the 1970s. After walking only a few minutes, my student colleagues and I board a train unavailable for most East Berliners. You see, we had the right credentials. As the train rumbled west, we could watch the East Berlin guard towers, the chained dogs, and that oppressive wall disappear in the background. We could be admitted through Checkpoint Charlie, which was not available for 99% of the people living in East Berlin. It was at this point that I realized that Kris Kristofferson had it wrong when he wrote the lyric in Me and Bobby McGee that says, "Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose." Freedom is a lot to lose, and lots of people lost their lives trying to get over that wall to find freedom. Freedom is one of the most important liberties that this country's democracy provides its citizens. Our Constitution ensures other liberties such as freedom of assembly, like we're doing right here, freedom of speech, which I'm exercising now, and of course freedom of the press, which protects what the Dallas Morning News publishes from undue influence by the government. It's no accident that the Founding Fathers, in my opinion, wrote the provision for a free press into the amendments to the Constitution. Their Constitution conceived a brilliant balance of power among the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. It's a really marvelous system, I think, of checks and balances. Yet they asked themselves, who would act on behalf of citizens to keep the government accountable? You know, these colonials had already experienced the oppressive governance of a monarchy and parliament that basically disregarded the rights of its citizens who lived across the Atlantic. Well, their answer to keeping the government serving its citizens rather than serving itself was the press. The Fourth Estate, as the newspaper press became known, which they intended to be the citizens' watchdog over the other three branches of government. If you don't believe that's true, then let me quote John Adams, who I think summed it up best. Liberty, starts out with that important word, cannot be preserved without a general knowledge among the people who have a right to that most dreaded and envied kind of knowledge. I mean the character and conduct of its rulers. Our liberty as a free press is meant to ensure the protection of all the liberties constitutionally guaranteed. Our liberty as a free press is meant to ensure the protection of all the liberties constitutionally guaranteed. A robust and free press is integral to the democracy that provides the liberties we cherish, in my opinion. And this is why I am, and I think you should be, worried about the business of news, because, or most especially, the news that newspapers gather and report. I've worked in the newspaper industry for 10 years now, and prior to that I worked in the television news business for 20 years. In fact, KVUE here in Austin, the ABC affiliate, was one of the 17 stations that I was responsible for across the United States. Yet what these last 10 years have taught me is this: as good as some local television stations are at covering the news, and some of them are really very good, none of them, not a single one of them, compete with the local newspaper for the breadth and depth of coverage of local news. And this gap is even more pronounced when you focus on coverage of city, county, and state government. This gap exists and persists simply because local television news organizations lack the scale of newspaper newsrooms. Put another way, they just employ a lot less journalists. In Dallas, the Morning News has more reporters than the ABC, CBS, NBC, and Fox television stations combined. It's just a fact. The preponderance of government watchdog journalism on the local level is being performed by the newsrooms of newspaper companies, and it's because they have the scale of resources to do the job. So if our country's newspapers don't get their business model figured out, as a society, we will lose a majority of the important local government accountability journalism being published today. And I can assure you this: no local media company will step in and take the newspaper's place. No other local news organization possesses the scale of resources to take over this work, and their business models, and I speak mostly of local television stations because they're really the only powerful force in local news in markets today, their business models won't accommodate them creating such scale. It's hardly a secret that the business of newspapers is under tremendous financial pressure. I'm sure that's why I'm here today. The print advertising that traditionally provided 80%, so 4 out of every 5 of a newspaper company's revenue dollars, has declined by over 50% in 4 years. That's right. 1 of every 2 print advertising dollars in the newspaper industry has vanished in 48 months. And it's a secular change. Those dollars are not coming back. Also, the great hope that digital advertising revenue would replenish the declining print advertising revenue will never be realized by newspaper companies. Consider that after 15 years of being into the digital publishing business, and even after newspaper print ad revenues have fallen by 50%, so we've been at it for 15 years, you've lowered the total amount of revenue by 50%. Total digital advertising in the newspaper industry represents only 13.4% of total industry advertising revenue. I saw that in your research also, by the way. So we agree with that. Digital advertising simply is not the savior that the industry hoped it would be. By the way, I don't think this is the newspaper industry's fault. Most newspapers have developed very large, robust, and quality audiences. Most every metropolitan newspaper has tremendous digital audiences. The problem lies in a virtually inexhaustible supply of digital advertising impressions that continue to grow at rates greater than the growth rate of the marketer's demand for these digital advertising impressions, and this predicament keeps advertising rates under constant downward pressure. What's worth $40 a thousand in print can be worth 40 cents a thousand in digital advertising. No metropolitan newspaper has been immune to these revenue declines. These declines have forced every newspaper to dramatically cut expenses or face becoming unprofitable. And those expense cuts have been proportionally felt in every department of newspaper companies, including the newsrooms of metropolitan newspapers. Over these past 4 years, I've had to downsize our own organization and our newsroom along with it. I have done a whole lot of soul searching about the business of news, especially that dimension of the news we call accountability journalism, watchdog journalism. That journalism that Jefferson and Adams and others were contemplating when they included a promise of a freedom of the press in the Bill of Rights. I have questioned whether this kind of news should be the province of for-profit media. So let's presume for a moment that it's not. What would be the alternatives to the for-profit news organizations pursuing this journalism? The non-profit model. There is some excellent and important journalism being published by the more recently minted not-for-profit news organizations. The Texas Tribune here in Austin is a shining example of the genre. MinnPost, ProPublica, all the others. Yet I believe if you were to total up the staffs of the 10 leading not-for-profit news organizations in the United States, excluding PBS and NPR, you might slightly exceed the 275-person newsroom of the Dallas Morning News. And recognize that our newsroom is focused on only Dallas and North Texas. There simply is not a not-for-profit news business model that can replicate and replace the scale of for-profit newspaper resources in market after market across the United States. So how about tax-supported media like PBS and NPR? Again, as good as these organizations can be at covering national and local news, and they are sometimes very good, they lack the scale to cover the breadth and depth of local reporting that metro newspapers provide. In addition, these partially government-funded media have a history of becoming political footballs. One need look back no farther than the resignation of Vivian Schiller earlier this year. Biting the hand that feeds you has never been a good policy, Yet, government-supported media demands this paradoxical practice if indeed such media are going to act as government watchdogs. How about amateur reporting, consumer-generated journalism, crowdsourcing, call it what you will? Certainly this reporting can and often does augment and enhance the reporting of professionally staffed newsrooms. Yet, let's agree that amateur reporting can't and won't adequately replace the work being done by professional journalists. The AMs aren't going to be at City Hall or at county government or the state legislature every time it's important to be there. They aren't going to be at all of the important school board meetings or in attendance at all the police and fire department, press conferences, and so on. Citizen journalism does provide scale, yet it is undisciplined, unorganized, and hence unreliable scale. Watchdogs are only effective if they are reliably on the job all of the time. So it comes down to professional scale. Frankly, if you're unconcerned about losing the scale of news resources provided by the metropolitan newspapers of this country, then you can be unconcerned about the failure and closing of newspaper companies. Local television is in no near-term jeopardy. PBS and NPR continue to find ways to be consistently funded. Good, new, but small nonprofit news organizations continue to spring up sporadically. And now we have consumers helping to augment news coverage. So if newspaper companies go away, it's not a matter of not having important local government reporting. It's a matter of having significantly diminished important local government reporting in the large and medium-sized markets across this country. And I don't think this would be healthy for our democracy. It is my contention that the informed citizenry that the forefathers envisioned when conceiving of a democratic republic, the accountability that they counted on the press providing when they established the concept of a free press, demand the scale of news resources that can match up to the vast and complex government of the United States in the 21st century. And this scale will go missing if newspaper companies don't get the for-profit business of news figured out. So you ask, what is the Dallas Morning News doing about this? Since I don't think that the